Alright, this is a project to rewire my old utility trailer, which I think I bought in 1987, and I'm not even sure if Harbor Freight existed in those days, but I didn't buy it from Harbor Freight. It was a JC Whitney, something that they sold. But as far as I can tell from the numerous videos I've seen, this is exactly the same trailer that Harbor Freight currently sells. So I think it's representative of the Harbor Freight light utility trailer, 4x8 foot bed, folding tongue and folding bed. So it rises up on casters on the bottom and can be stored in a garage or shed or what have you. I'd recently had this overhauled by my trailer hitch dealer. They put new wheels on it, the wheels and the tires, new bearings of course, just checked everything out for safety, and they rewired it. They offered to put in new LED lamps and markers. It's really only one marker and one tail light per side, and put on a new plug, heavier than the original one, and they also changed the spare tire out, and I think they did a good enough job, except that they did not take into account the fact that the trailer needs to fold. And I was starting to get into it, and I saw that they used non-solder type crimp lugs, but the kind with an adhesive shrink tube covering over it. So that's well and good. Although the original wiring I had on here was soldered at the joints. Also, they attached all of their wiring to the frame with just looped zip ties, which is okay, but I had fittings on here from before, actual cable clamps that I thought would do a better job. And I've also seen a lot of YouTube videos on how to wire the Harbor Freight trailers, and I thought a lot of them left a lot to be desired. So since I'm going to be rewiring this trailer anyway, I decided to try to document what I'm doing in case it'll be helpful to somebody else. I am going to keep this short length of cable. That's a nice cable, and it goes up to this point. And when I told the dealer I was going to rewire it, they gave me about 46 feet of the same kind of cable they used, except this is 3-conductor, whereas the stuff that they used was only 2-conductor, and they did not run a ground wire. They relied on the frame to be the ground, and because of the hinges, the ground from front to rear is pretty iffy. The only place the ground is actually attached to the frame is right here, right at the front of the tongue, and then it's relying on pivot points like this, or hitch pins like this, or the hinges like this to make the ground connection. And while it worked, I actually got pulled over driving the trailer back to my home by an officer who wasn't trying to get me for anything, but he noticed that around a few turns that we were on the same road, he did not see me signaling, so he pulled me over to ask if I was signaling, and I said yes I was. And he said, yeah, I thought I could see your van lights flashing, but I did not see your trailer lights flashing, so we should do a check and see if your trailer lights are working. And they were not at that point. And when I got on the trailer and bounced up and down on it, they started working again. So it is a problem. I don't think relying on the frame hinges to make a good ground for the lights is a good way to go. I think you need to have a wired ground on these if you want them to work properly. Certainly I had it on here for all the time since 1987 until 2025, with the lights working reliably. So I'm going to go back to the wired ground, and that's why I've gone from the 2-conductor wire to the 3-conductor wire. But then even then, I don't like this stuff that much. Originally I had it wired with extension cord cable, so I bought about 46 feet of this stuff from the local Ace Hardware. It's 16 gauge wire, it's stranded, it's a high quality cable, a water resistant rubber, some sort of rubbery plastic or whatever that is, jacket on it, good insulation. It's not exactly intended for trailer use, but I thought it's probably at least as good as this stuff, and it's more flexible, and I think the jacket is a bit more robust. The other key to this type of thing is, does it fit through the holes in the frame for wherever I can fish it through the holes? And yes, it does. These are approximately 3/8 inch diameter holes. This cable's a bit smaller, so it should fit through there wherever I want to fit it through the frame. And there's also some places like this where there's just individual conductors coming out of light fixtures, and they're taped here with electrical tape to protect them. And I've cut off the shrink tubing or wrapped electrical tape that they had here just so I could see how they made the joints. I'm going to protect these stretches a little better, and to that end I bought some of this slit tubing from the Ace Hardware. It's the kind of thing, it's corrugated and it has a slit in it. So you can slide it around wires, and then it sort of snaps shut behind it, and that'll provide some additional protection from the elements, from ultraviolet, from, you know, abrasion, what have you. And that also will fit through holes in the trailer. So the first thing is just to go over the layout of the trailer and its lights. Here's a top view of the trailer. The tongue is in the front. This is the forward bed. This is the rear bed. Each of these is 4 by 4 feet. There are 2 marker lights near the front of the bed and 2 lights near the rear of the bed. They're not quite as far back as I have them here, but they're pretty close to that. This is the left side. This is the right side. Obviously it's a top view. This is the left marker. And that's the right marker. This is the left combination stoplight and left turn signal. This is the combination right hand stoplight and turn signal. So this is stop, turn. Now for an overview of the wiring. This is your left marker, your right marker, your left stop turn, and your right stop turn. These are the only electrical or electronic devices on the trailer, unless you do something beyond what is included with the kit. Since I have an LED version on mine currently fitted, I consider the LEDs to make it borderline electronic. That's why I said electronic earlier. I did some checking and I found that 16 gauge AWG, that's American wire gauge, is adequate for trailer wiring on this size and class of trailer. And the extension cord that I showed earlier is also 16 gauge, as was the wiring in the flat cable that I got from the dealer. So 16 gauge throughout is what I've got. A guideline for this type and class of trailer is 18 AWG for all wiring except for the ground, and if you have a ground wire it should be 16 gauge, which is larger. With the wire gauges, the smaller the number, the larger the wire diameter. However, that's for incandescent light bulbs in the light fixtures. This is LEDs. It takes a lot less current, so the current should be maybe a tenth, if that much, of what it would be with an incandescent bulb. So even a 16 gauge wire is overkill. I could have certainly used 22 gauge wire, although you don't usually find 22 gauge wire in extension cords, so the smallest I was finding was the 16 gauge, and I had to get that to get a 3 conductor cable with a jacket that would fit through the holes in the frame. So the wiring, there's really only 3 circuits on the trailer. There's the left turn stop lamp, the right turn stop lamp, and the markers. Each of the turn stop lamp assemblies has a marker in it, built into it. And the marker, just like these, it shines light sideways, so traffic coming from the side of the trailer can see it. So that's the direction of the light. And of course the turn stop light goes to the rear, although there's usually some provision for showing it a pretty wide angle out to the side, so traffic coming in from an angle can see it pretty well. So those are the lights, and the circuits are, again, the marker circuit, and it's going to come down and it's going to split at some point. It's going to go into a left side wire and a right side wire. It's going to come down and there will be a single wire coming out of the marker. Typically these only have one wire. The return or ground is usually done just by connecting it to the frame of the trailer, and I'll get back to that later. So you're going to have a junction in the wiring here and here where these short wires come out of the front markers. And then the same wire will come down the left side, and it'll have a junction where it goes into the short wire coming out of the marker part of the left rear light assembly. Then this guy will come down and have a junction on the wire to the short wire going to the right lamp assembly's marker. So that'll be the marker circuit. Now we also have the left stop turn and the right stop turn. Those circuits. So there's one wire coming there, and it'll parallel this wire, and it'll go all the way to the back, and it'll go into the wire coming from the stop turn part of this assembly, and there will be a junction in the wire at that point, because these are short wires coming out of here, and you have to have a junction in the wire to get it to the long wire, which is running up the frame. So we have the right stop turn wire. It's going to run all the way back. There's going to be a junction in the wire, and it's going to go into the stop turn portion of the rear light. So that's the 3 circuits that are going to be on the trailer. In addition to that, there's also the ground. That's the additional wire that's going to the towing vehicle. Like I already touched on, usually this is just the cable coming from the plug on the vehicle and it goes up to the front of the trailer and immediately connects to the frame and doesn't go any further. And we're still going to do that. So I'm going to have it come over, and it's going to have a junction, and it's going to go right to the frame. That's a symbol for a chassis ground on electronics and electrical circuits, and I'm using it here for the trailer frame. So you're going to have that wire going there for sure. You still want the frame to be grounded to the vehicle, even if you're not using the ground for the lights. Then I'm going to have a wire coming out of that same junction. This is going to be the ground wire. And remember that I said that the marker lights are going to be connected sort of internally to the frame. But I don't trust the frame, so I'm going to be going to the same point where one of the bolts on the marker light goes to the frame. This will be done through a mounting bolt. And at that same point, I'm going to connect a wire over to my ground. So I've got a junction in my ground wire, which is running along with these cables, and I'm going to have it connect over to the same place where the marker light is connected to the frame. And by doing that, I'll also establish a connection of the ground wire to the frame at this point, and these markers are on the front part of the frame. So doing this will also ground the front half of the frame. I'm also going to have a wire running here from this same junction. It's going to be doing the same exact thing over here. Although I maybe wouldn't need to, because I've already got the frame grounded, the front frame grounded at this point, but it's just painted metal bolted together. There isn't really anything guaranteeing that you have a good ground connection through all the different sections of the metal frame. So I'm going to do a junction here and run it over to, again, the mounting lug for this marker light. So I'm sure I've got a good electrical connection to the lights for the ground. Now I'm going to run the wire down here on both sides of the trailer. And in this case, there is also not a separate wire for the stop, turn light fixture. It also is done through a mounting bolt to the chassis or to the frame. So it's relying on that connection. So I'm going to do the same thing I did up here. I'm going to be taking this ground wire, making a junction in it, and going right over to the same bolt that is making the ground connection for this. And I'm going to do the same thing here. So this also establishes a ground to the rear half of the frame for whatever that does for us, which is almost nothing, but I think it's still probably good practice. So that's the wiring layout, schematically speaking. Now let's look at these 4 wires that have to go into the vehicle. But before that, I'm going to step back. So I think it should be pretty clear at this point that this here is one of those 3 conductor extension cords. It'll be running all the way down the left side of the trailer. And this here is also going to be one of the 3 conductor extension cords running down the right side of the trailer. At some point they're going to come together and connect up to the tongue of the trailer. So let's talk about that part now. Alright, here's a diagram of the connectors used for the trailer, and I'm going with the usual flat 4-pin connector that's most common for this type and class of trailer. So the vehicle should have a cord coming out of its electrical system with a plug that looks like this. usually molded plastic, and it's going to have one pin, one metal pin, and then positions for 3 more. And there's actually, this is a male connector, and there will be 3 female connectors in these positions. Then there will be a similar but sort of mirror image version of the connector on the trailer wiring, and this should come with the trailer kit, where this one has an exposed metal pin, this one has a female pin, so there's a pin inside of this plastic molding. And where this connector had 3 female pins inside the plastic molding, this one will have 3 metal pins sticking out. So this pin sticks into the female receptacle here. These 3 male pins go into the 3 female receptacles in this plug here. So you can tell which one's the vehicle and which one's the trailer because of their distinctive appearances. Now, how to tell which one is which? There is a standard in the industry for this, and unless you've got something really weird going on, it should follow this. The connector that's different from the other 3 pins is always the ground, and that's typically a white wire in the cable coming from this plug. It's typically going to be white. The marker light position, designated by M here, is typically a brown wire. The left circuit for the stop lights and turn signals is typically, I've got it marked here LST just for my yucks, but the actual colors is yellow for this one. And this one is typically green. So if you check your cable that's provided with your trailer or when you bought somewhere else, verify that it has the white, brown, yellow, green color coding. And if it doesn't, then look at your pin and your pin connector here and figure out which colors you do have and make a note of it. So I should be able to go back to this diagram here and mark in the colors. So the color codes of wires coming out of these fixtures on lights that are intended for this type and class of trailer at least, and they're the same ones that were on my old lighting incandescent bulbs from back in '87, and the new LED ones from 2025, they seem to have the same color, so I believe it's something of a standard. The left marker light and the right marker light, they're the same color, and they typically use black wire, so I'm going to mark that as black. And there is no actual wire here, it's just the mounting screw. So it's just the screw connecting to the frame that normally makes the connection. And in our case, I'm running the wired ground, and the wired ground will be going to the same point where the screw goes into the frame, right next to the mounting light. So it's the best possible ground we can arrange for those lights. But their wiring is naturally black. Now the combination stoplight turn signals, they have a distinctive left and right. There's also a license plate that's attached to the left marker, or the left light rather. So I'm just going to kind of show that in here. So that's the license plate here. And so in addition to the light bulb or LEDs that are used for the stopping and turn signal part, there's a separate lamp which shines light out the side. That's the marker part. And on the left one, there's usually one that it may be the same bulb that provides the marker function, or it may be a separate one, but it's one that shines out the bottom of the fixture to illuminate the license plate. There, license plate. The marker light wires are brown, and that's on both sides. And the light bulb that provides the stop and turn function on the left side is yellow, and on the right side is green. And you may recognize that those are the same colors that are commonly coming out of the trailer's electrical plug. Brown for marker, yellow for left stop turn signal, green for right stop turn signal. So those wire colors match up in most cases. And again, these fixtures are connected to the trailer frame by bolts or screws, and at least one of those will be making the ground connection for the entire fixture. So once again, we have to run our ground wire to the same point where the light fixture is making its ground connection to the frame. Now for the new cables, since I'm using extension cables or extension cord cables, they're going to be following the wire codes common for residential or industrial wiring, and those are not going to be ones that line up with the coloring that's normally used for trailers. So I'm going to have a translation for the cables themselves. Because the green wire is associated with ground, I might as well keep it used in that way. So I'm going to go ahead and call the ground wire green, and I'm going to call the marker wire white, and I'm going to call the wire that operates the stop turn signals and make that black. So that's my cable colors scheme. So I can tell from that where I have, for example, this junction up here, I'm going to be going from a white wire on the cable to a black wire coming out of the marker light. On this light, a brown wire coming out of the light fixture is going to be going to the white cable. The yellow wire coming out of this left fixture is going to be going to a black cable wire. The green wire coming out of this one is going to be going to a black cable wire. And I'm going to be able to follow that up here as well for the colors coming from the cable from the vehicle. So I'm going to mark in here again, the left stop turn signal is typically yellow, so that's yellow, and the right stop turn signal is usually green, so I'm going to put in green here. And the marker is usually brown, so I'm going to put in brown here. And the ground is usually white, so I'm going to put in white there. So now I've got all my colors figured out. I think the other important thing I should be doing before I get much further along is to establish the routing of the wires or the cables, and also where they're going to go around the pivot points or the hinge points on the trailer. It's sort of a no-brainer for the ones going from the front to the rear half of the bed, because it hinges down here at the bottom, and all you really need to do, it's probably a good thing to have the trailer folded up when this wiring is done, so you can actually run the wire around from one side to the other, and you know you've got enough cable there. When this was originally done, they had just run this wire straight through this hole here and then into the corresponding hole on the other half of the frame or the bed section. Obviously that wasn't going to work when you folded it, and so they basically just spliced the cable on each side and added an extra length, which worked, but you know, and I'm still not real crazy about using these. I already had holes drilled in the frame that were not there originally, so I could put in cable clamps to hold the cable in position better and more firmly. What's trickier than this, and boy, you got to watch these license plates. Folding this part up here, you have to be a little careful. The cable is going to be coming up the side of the tongue, one side or the other. It's going to have to go around this part of it, and you have to make sure that it doesn't go around this part of it in a way that's going to get into trouble when it folds up into this bracket up here. So I think the best way to do this is to take this out somewhere where I can fold the tongue all the way up, and then run a piece of cord on there and sort of check it out for best routing that's going to work both in the folded and the unfolded positions. So I've just used a scrap of that other cord, and I've got it taped onto the frame down here where the cable from the trailer plug is going to terminate. So, and this is the bottom of the frame, this is the top of the frame. I want to run it along the bottom of the frame probably. Although actually I've drilled these holes in here from before, and they're on the top of the frame, so I guess that's the way I had it routed. And that makes sense, doesn't it? Let's see. What we want to do is make sure we don't catch the cable on either side of these three plates here. We want to make sure that when this is folded up into here, either the cable's totally on the inside, which it can't because the inside's blocked by this part of the fitting, or it has to be on the side of the frame that's not going to go into this U-shaped channel, which would suggest, you know, coming around the back here. So I think what I have to do is fold the tongue up and look at it in that perspective. Okay, so the frame is up now, and I've got to get this cable going in a friendlier direction so I can envision how it's going to go. I know I'm looking up to the sky here, sorry about that, but I think I'm going to have it running along the bottom, and around here it needs to not be in this area, but it still needs to be coming down here. So I think the trick is to have it attached to the frame on the bottom, like right along here. So here's the cable running down the inside of the top edge of the tongue frame, and I'm probably going to put a cable clamp in this old hole that I'd originally drilled for the wiring and clamp the cable at this point at an angle where the cable's going to leave the channel and it's going to arc out around and then go in where I've drilled this other hole and have another cable clamp there. So the cable will go around this fitting. I think that's probably the way I'm going to do it. And then it'll continue down here to this pivot point. And I had drilled a hole here in the top face of the tongue frame, also for a cable clamp. And so that is where I'm sure I had the original wiring leaving this channel. It would have left the channel at that point. It would have been held to it by the clamp at that point, and then jumped over to the frame here. So I'm thinking that, so this is going to fold out this way, so I need to do something that allows the cable to get up kind of like this. I had a hole drilled, which I obviously used for a cable clamp or a wire tie at some point. So cable's leaving the tongue here, it's looping down, and then it's coming back up, and it's going to be anchored inside the front half of the frame. Now let's see if that's enough cable to allow the tongue to fold down. So I shortened it a little bit. The cable's still coming off the tongue here. It's looping up pretty much in the same direction, and then I've still got it taped to where I think I have a cable tie or a cable clamp. So, and then this is just the cable that continues on, so don't pay attention to that part. I'm going to fold this back up and see if it still has enough slack in it. And I do. It's got a nice friendly exiting the clamp I'm going to have here, just making a nice little curve around and then coming up to where it's going to be clamped in this area. And there's adequate slack there. It's not being pulled tight. So I think that's probably about perfect. Now what I figured would happen is this cable is actually coming from the rear as far as this marker light is concerned, and that's because this hinge point or this pivot point is behind the marker light on the frame. But that's okay, because the first place the cable has to go is up to this marker light, so there will be junction there, and then I'm going to start a new length of cable running from there, and it'll be running down through the hole in the cross frame down here. It'll be hooked up to a cable tie here. It'll be wrapping around the hinge point, coming up here, going through a hole in the cross frame, and then finally ending up at the wiring for the rear stop turn signal. And I still have a hole here from where I had previously run my ground wire to on the old wiring, and the shop just cut it off. But the goal is to have it go to here. I'm considering possibly, in addition to these three wires, running an actual ring lug and putting it on this post. This is actually where the lamp gets its ground. So right now it's getting it through this bracket and then through the bolt here into the frame. And it's a painted frame. The paint is not scraped off. It's just getting whatever ground it can get by the bolts touching the unpainted inner walls of the holes. It's not optimal at all. And I'm pretty sure that originally I had a lug on the old lamp and then ran the ground wire along with the other wires. And this is where I've got that split corrugated plastic tubing, is to protect the wires in a situation like this where it's going to be outside the frame and then hooking around and then going into a cable clamp. So I think I know what to do there. Alright, I've decided to, instead of running 2 cables from the front of the tongue up one side of the tongue and then continuing the one cable down that side and the other one going all the way around and then down this side, I decided it would make more sense just to have both cables start down here. One cable go this way, one cable go this way. Each one of them have their own loop around the pivot point of the tongue, and then they would just continue down their respective sides. That's the way I'm doing that. In the course of doing this, quite a lot of years ago, I'd put a couple of brackets temporarily on the top of this trailer bed and just drilled through from the top, and most of them came out fairly cleanly, but this one was all badly splintered out, so I broke some of that off and filled it with epoxy wood putty, and I'm going to sand that down some and repaint that area. So I'm just doing that while I'm at it. I've decided to put some painter's tape on the frame to mark left and right so I don't get mixed up by accident. The way I've decided to join these wires is by twisting, soldering, shrink tubing, and then taping over. I think that's at least as solid as any other method I've seen, and it avoids the problems of the self-soldering splices that you're never sure how well the solder permeated into the strands of the wire. You can't really see it clearly. This way I'll be able to tell I have a good solid solder connection, and then I can insulate it at least as well as the other methods using shrink tube and tape. And certainly the trailer dealer that I had work on the rest of the trailer says that they virtually always just use lots of black electrical tape for insulation on wires, because they haven't found anything that works better under all the situations. For that end, instead of using my laboratory soldering station, I'm just going to use my old Weller soldering gun. I can have it out here in the garage a lot easier, and I'm just using some plain old 60-40 solder like you'd use for electrical or electronic stuff. And I have a heat gun here for the shrink tubing. Alright, so there's the twisted soldered wire. I checked it all the way through. The solder melted all the way through the strands. So I'm just going to clean it up by snipping off the excess. Take off maybe 1/8 of an inch at the end of that. And then do likewise for the other wires. Now you may notice I've got the trailer cable coming in here, and the green conductor is going to the black of the cable I've designated for the right side of the trailer. That's the left the way I'm looking at it, and that's because the chart here says that the green wire coming from the cable, that's the middle one there, and the middle one goes down, and that's defined as the black wire in the cable. And there the wire is snipped off, nice and clean. And there the shrink tubing is slipped over. This is about where the insulation on the conductors ends. Then the soldered area is about here, and this area has nothing in it. Once I get the shrink tubing soft from the heat gun and shrinking, I'm also going to crimp over this part with the pliers, pinching it off and sealing it. So it came out like that. This is the part over the insulation, this is the twisted soldered part, and there is the end of it crimped flat with the pliers. I'm going to do that for each joint, no matter how many conductors are going into it. And here is the black conductor of the left side cable going to the yellow wire from the trailer plug. And that again corresponds to the yellow up here going down to the black on the cable. And that wire from the trailer lighting cable. Here's the brown from the trailer cable, the one that comes from the plug connector, going into the two white conductors in the two left and right side cables. And again, that's consistent with the brown wire, that's the marker, going down to the white on both sides. So now the only thing I have yet to do is make the ground connections. So I've got the two green wires from the left and right cables. I need to put ring lugs on them. There's already a ring lug on the white wire coming from the trailer cable. And again, checking the diagram to make sure we don't make any mistakes. The white wire is the ground, and it's going to not only the frame, but also to the green wire on both sides. Okay, I now have all my wires from the trailer cable to the two left and right cables. I've got the green and yellow wires from the trailer cable going to the black conductors on both side cables. I've got the brown trailer cable going to the white wires on both side cables. I've got the green wires from the side cables going to ring lugs as I do the white wire from the trailer cable. All three of these will go together under one lug on the frame right there at the front of the tongue. Okay, there are all the wires for grounding going under that one lug. There's a number 1032 screw that I'm using, because that's what I used originally on the trailer, with a split ring washer, tightened down nice and tight. So now I have to dress the other cables and get them started on their way up the sides. I've pulled the joined cable ends that were soldered or twisted, soldered, and heat shrinked, folded them back on themselves, and then brought all three cables together into a short bundle, leaving only the ends of the wires exposed where they go to ground here. And my plan is to tuck it back into this part of the frame so it doesn't flop around too much, and then start anchoring the individual cables. Alright, so there's the bundle, there's the frame ground. The right side cable is looping around and going up the right side of the tongue. The left side cable is coming straight up the left side of the tongue. And I still need to put an anchor in for the trailer cable, so it's got some support at this end. But in the meantime, I have snaked the cable with, see if I can get the camera in here, cable clamps at a few locations, going up the inside of the tongue, and then a couple of cable clamps to help the cable go neatly around this bracket, keeping in mind that these two fingers here will be coming in like this, and I don't want them dragging on this, so that's why I bowed it out there a little bit. Then I have one more cable clamp right up here near the pivot point for the tongue, and likewise on the other side. And I have enough cable cut here to make the connection to the front marker light. Again, that's my intention, is to terminate that cable somewhere up in this area and have it splice into the marker light and then continue with another cable running in that direction that's going to run all the way down inside the frame, go through the hinge and back up the other side, and the same thing on this side. So at this point I want to do a double triple check on how much slack I really need in this cable to be able to handle the pivoting of the tongue. Not very much, actually. You just need to make sure that you don't expect to run it straight up here, because then when the tongue flops it'll get tighter. You want to try to keep it anchored somewhere in the ballpark of you know, something like that maybe. So when this part pivots around, it doesn't really change anything in this area except that it'll bend a little bit. Alright, there's the trailer cable. I've put 2 cable clamps on it. In this case they're just drilled and tapped into the frame. I didn't put nuts on the back, but you could put nuts on the back, it doesn't matter. And there's plenty of slack here to connect up to the cable coming from the vehicle. So that part is done. Okay, here's a final test of the cable routing through the tongue pivot point. Alright, I've got the cable going around the tongue pivot point. Just a little bit of slack there. And it's anchored with a cable clamp to the frame on both ends of that loose piece. Same thing on the other side. And now it just has to go up to here. Now this is the front of the trailer here. This is the very front of the bed. So once we connect up to this marker light on the side and the corresponding one here, then we'll run an additional cable from this point heading backwards. So that cable and this cable will come up side by side and be spliced into this one black wire that's coming out of the marker light. The white wire coming out of the marker light, at least in this particular instance, is going to a screw to the frame, but I'm going to add to that same screw the ground conductor in the cable. So there's going to be 2 more lugs going onto that screw. One thing I noticed about these marker lights is these particular LED ones that were put on to replace the original ones that came with the trailer kit. The original ones just went right out that hole there, centrally located. But this one, they come out the side, and they were pinched. This raised bracket here actually goes around that. So to exit it, these wires were pinched in between the plastic and the sharp edges of the hole, which is not good. So I'm going to be revising that. I've drilled out the rivets, or I'm drilling them out anyway, and I'm going to do these better. Alright, I've added a 3/8 inch hole. I'm keeping the old holes where the mounting screws went through. That seems to be a standard size. It was for the old fixture and the new fixture, but they used pop rivets. I'm going to use screws with lock washers to put the lamp back on, and I'm also going to try to seal so you don't get a lot of extra moisture inside these fixtures. Now they are kind of potted. I think the whole electronics is potted, so it's not that important. So instead of putting like a bead of silicone caulk or adhesive or whatever around this, I don't think it needs it. Might actually benefit from you know, having a little hole in it for ventilation. There seem to be a couple holes already. But I'm gonna probably put some silicone right here where the wires go through the hole for extra protection. So I put some shrink tubing around the wires inside the fixture, and for maybe 3/4 of an inch on the other side, and shrunk it and stuck it through. And I'm just gonna seal that hole with a little bit of silicone sealant or adhesive or whatever it is I have in the tube. And because the circuit board is potted with epoxy, it's waterproof. I'm really just trying to protect the wires at this point and prevent unnecessary rain, you know, from making its way inside the fixture, even though, you know, it's got drain holes and stuff. So, well, it can get out anyway. It's hardly sealed. There's no gasket or anything. Up to this point, I haven't actually connected any wiring to the lights. All I've really done is made the connection from the trailer cable through the big bundle splice junction down there. And now I'm actually going to start terminating it to the lights. I'm using green as the ground. I'm using white as the marker, and I'm using black as the brake and turn signal. So it's a good time to do a sanity check on this and use a continuity checker of some sort between the plug down there, the trailer plug, and these wires before I start connecting them up. Make sure they're the same on both sides, that you didn't screw up there, and make sure that they match up with the pin out. What you expect, that the one that's different is ground, the one next to that is the marker, and then the left and the right. So there I've got the one mounting screw for the marker light. It's about a 1032 by 3/4 inch. I have a nut and a lock washer up against the frame. Then I've got stacked the 3 ring lugs. That's from the white wire, or the ground wire, from the marker light, and then the green wire, which is the ground wire of both the cables, the one that's coming from the front and the one that's coming from the rear. And then there's another lock washer and nut stacked on there. And I've done the same thing on the other side. Okay, now I've got the black wire from the marker light, that's the positive side, going to the 2 white wires in the 2 cables, the one from the front, the one from the rear. They're all twisted together and soldered, remembering that the white wires here are for the marker lights. And I can always double triple check that by going back to the marker, and it's a black wire from the lamp, and it's a white conductor in the cable. And then the 2 black wires in the 2 cables, and those are for the turn signals, and that has to go to the back of the trailer. So we've come forward from the tongue, we're going up to this splice, and now this cable here is going to go towards the back of the trailer. So all I have to do now is put some heat shrink tubing on this and button it up with electrical tape. Alright, I put the heat shrink over the spliced wires. Have to use a slightly larger size for the 3 wires. And then with the end going past where the wire ends, and by the way, I cut that nice and straight with a set of wire cutters, so it doesn't come to a point, it just ends abruptly. And then I squeeze the semi-molten heat shrink tubing with the end of my needle nose pliers and hold it for a few seconds, and then it's kind of sealed off the end of the tubing that way. So I've got a pretty good insulation here now on top of good electrical connection, and now all I have to do is just tie it all together. I need to keep a little bit of slack in the wire. I don't want it to be pulling during vibrations, so I always want to have some slack wiring. And I'm going to fold these guys back in parallel with the cables, just like I did up front. and then wrap it up with electrical tape. Do the same on the other side. Okay, everything's buttoned up there. There's a bit of slack on it, and that's all well and good. I put in an extra cable clamp for the cable running in the other direction, and for good measure I took the entire bundle of both cables and tie wrapped it to a spare hole that was in the frame, just for good measure. Did the same thing over here. Alright, the cable running from front to back runs down here. I give it a little bit of slack because I've got one of those hitch pins in there for the fence rail holder. I want to have a little slop around it. It continues through a hole in the frame, runs on down, and here I have it clamped to the frame just before the reinforced part where the axle goes. And then I have it coming down. I also have it clamped to the frame. This is the rear cross section of the front half of the frame. So this is the rear cross section of the front of the frame. And I've got the clamp going at a bit of an angle to encourage the loop to loop to the right a little bit. And the same thing over here for the other side, the left side. So the only thing I really have left to do on this is terminate the cable to the wires coming from the stop turn signal on each side. I'm going to stick some of my flexible corrugated split tubing. I can't really get, there's a circuit board in there and I can't really open up the hole more, I don't think. But yeah, I won't be able to push this into the hole because there's a circuit board just inside the hole. So what I'm going to do is cover this with RTV inside the inside of this, and then slide it over these wires so it's at least protected from where it's going to go through the frame. And I've got a hole for that already on each side. Alright, I've fed the corrugated slit tubing with the wiring inside through a hole that I drilled. The guys who did the wiring on this earlier left it really short. I don't think the wiring's usually provided very long to start with. And to get it through as much as possible here, I had to go from using the hole I intended to using one just a little bit up the frame. And similarly over here, this was the original hole, but to try to get it around from the bottom of this fixture up to there would have left, you know, the stripped wire would have been just inside the hole. So I drilled a new hole here so I could bring it in most directly and have enough to work with on the inside. Now these I'm not gonna do by twisting side to side like you would with a wire nut. There just isn't enough room, so I'm going to be doing it by sweating the wires and then soldering them together in parallel but pointing opposite directions, and then slide shrink tubing over it. So there are the sweated parallel wires, and I've kept my shrink tubing way back on the wires so they don't pre-shrink, because these are pretty tightly sized. I want them good and tight on there when they shrink. Alright, there's the two wires on the right side with the shrink wrap over the sweat soldered joints. And here's the same thing over on the left side, and I have my ground lug, which will go onto a screw that passes through the bracket onto which the light is attached and goes through and connects up to that. That's the way I had it originally. These screws here make a good enough electrical connection to this, and if it turns out where it doesn't for some reason, I can always put a lug on one of these and just run a short length of wire down and put it under the head of this screw and reestablish the ground that way, but I think it'll be fine the way it is. Alright, I've got the cable clamped one more time, and there's a little bit of slack here for the two wires going into the lamp. The ground has a bit of a loop too, so if there's any vibration it doesn't pull too hard on the wires. And then I've got something similar over here, although it doesn't make a loop, but it still has enough slack. I'm thinking of putting a tie wrap through this hole since there's a hole there. That's where you want to put the chocks behind the wheels if you want to have a more graceful descent, or just make sure there's enough room behind it. It won't go too far because the hoist will prevent it from rolling more, but it's good to have chocks there. I didn't have it in this instance. Alright, I'm hooked up to the vehicle and I've got the headlights on. You can see that the marker lights are in fact on. It's all well and good. Side markers are on. License plate illumination is on. Everything seems to be working. Let's try the turn signals. And let's try the other one. There we go. All the new wiring is working. The only thing I need to do here is fix my trailer some more, because I stupidly, when I started unfolding it to bring it outside, I let loose of the bracket that holds the front and rear parts together, so while it was vertical, the rear part fell backwards and smacked on the rear edge of the trailer, which didn't do that any harm, but it did manage to, at the angle it was at, I think, just barely push down on these. You can kind of see where it kind of got bent all out of whack. I might salvage these, or I might see if I can just buy some new ones. This one's twisted up worse. It's not a big owie, but it still needs to be fixed. I don't think I can get my fence stakes in here if I put the sides on. until I fix it. Anyway, success on the rewiring part of it.